You are watching Lesson 7 for Fall 2020 for continuing students of the Dance of the Eye and the Hand.
Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to spend some time exploring how to paint snow. And in painting snow in Chinese painting, we're basically painting it by not painting it. It'll be the white space that we leave behind. And so that's kind of a tricky turning things backwards or upside down in your Western mind of paying attention to where you're not putting any ink. So to create the snow in this painting, we've had to define the rocks and we had to define the mist behind, or the cloudiness behind. And what's left then is the snow. So we'll practice that today, and then I have a second piece that I will demo, which is more about the emptiness, both in outline and with some wash, creating the absence of color, if you will, or the white of the paper, to create snow. And then in today's packet, there is also a third piece that you can just try on your own, and is a winter scene with pine tree and snow and a couple of red cardinals. So let's get started.
So here is our first model with a stone wall with snow on top. We'll start by defining the rocks or the stones on the wall, some of their shading, and then the shadow above the snow, and adding a little more and a little more wash, lighter and lighter and lighter, to define the absence, which will become the snow.
So to start, I have 3 dishes that I'm going to make my 3 tones of gray in. So putting a little more than a spoonful of water in each dish. Then I'm going to take my brush, it's a fresh brush, and a little bit of tissue to wipe off the excess. Get my brush wet, comb it out. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of ink, mix it into my first dish to make a gray, mix it again to make a lighter gray, and a third time to make my lightest gray. And I'm going to start with these rocks. I'll use a little bit of black to do some of the outline. So we'll start with our black. I'm going to make some of the outlines of this stone wall of the different rocks. It doesn't need to be a lot, but enough to give some definition. To the stones that we're seeing. We're leaving the tops open because they are covered with snow. And just sort of even sketching some of these shapes in. So there's my basic outline. Then I'm going to dry my brush off and add a little bit of shading. I'll use my middle to heavy gray, and I'm going to add some shading. So they're coming down from the bottom of these rocks, or you can go up and come down, just to put in some roughness or some shadow. And putting more of the weight at the bottom of each shape, so they feel like rock, low center of gravity. And try to avoid anything that's a pattern, that sort of vary your line and your stroke. Then I'll let that dry. I'm going to do some of the shading up above, and this I can do with the middle gray. And I want to do it so that it's a little bit dry, not too much at once, but just enough to sort of begin to create the sense of line. Now I'll go lighter and just keep, while that's wet, keep working at going farther up. And I'm using really the side of the brush, fairly dry, lighter still. And if I really want that to sort of blend off into the distance, I can go tip to water and just really put a fair amount of water in the brush, and more of this is just liquid. I'm going to take a little bit of this and go back into my rocks, and again from the bottom just take out some of that white to sort of cast some shadow, but also to close up those lines that are at the base. And just finish that off. A little more shadow, less light as I get down farther in the water towards the ground. And now a lot of water. This is more like wet dots, just to create the fog in the background and mystery. But now we have our snow.
Here in our second model for this week, the snow is created more by the emptiness or the void, the large spaces that are left untouched by the brush.
So for this next piece, where the snow is really the void or the empty space, I'm going to start with my trees. And remembering these are winter trees, which means they're sort of sparse, but they're strong lines. They're the part of the tree that will survive through the winter. So they are strong lines. They don't even have to always connect, but they should have a beginning, a middle, and an ending to them, so that they are strong, with some leaves or some branches, if you will, coming off. And I started with what I would call my host tree or the master tree, and then work from that to some of the others. So you're thinking about branches that would have enough stored energy to survive a winter. And so the trees are sort of in sharp contrast to what is to come. And may even have some snow on their branches, so a little bit of flying white is a good thing. And then this tree up here, it sort of has a bent trunk, some strong, maybe it's a plum tree, old plum tree. And I'll add more definition to these as I come back later and do some of the dots. Then I also have a few more distant pines. I think I'll just wait for those for the moment. Now I'm going to change my tone to a middle gray. It's too dark. Here we go. I'm going to add some of this outline, and some of these are riding on that snowbank. Some of them are behind it. And then add some of the pond, distant shore of it over here, some other rock, my foreground rocks. And then I have a distant hill that I can start putting in like this. And I might as well put in my distant outlines while I'm doing this. That'll be doing a strong but dry black, pretty close to the top of the page. And these can be nice dry lines, broken lines. They're sort of distant hills or distant mountains. Can be done more with the side of the brush than with the tip. So you get some sharpness to it, strength to it, and then bring this off, sort of sketchily off the page. And if you look real closely to the picture, back in this distance, there are a couple of buildings, so I'll put in those roof lines. There's just a few of them. And they're not very visible at first glance, but if you take a closer look, you'll see them. So then there's a couple more over here. We generally just start with the roof line. They're pretty simple. Now I will add these trees, which I'll go back to black, because they're going to be at some distance, and I want them to be strong, not too wet. It can be a fairly dry line, and then just some slight branches. Again, they're distant trees, so they're not very well defined, more just a couple of strokes. And these two are coming into that embankment. And one more over here. So then I'm going to start adding some of my wash, and I'm going to start with the foreground water, which is, I'm just going to clean my brush here a bit, is a medium gray, maybe a little bit of a darker gray in it, and I'm just going to stroke this across, doing it in lines so that when the ink dries, it'll look like water. So I really want to be sure I'm just doing straight lines, bringing this across. It's fairly wet. This is sort of what I would think of as winter water. It's almost black or blackish. And I'm also going to do my sky, which will be similar. Pull this down a bit, using a mix of both the medium and the dark, really putting a lot on my brush and going all the way across. Again, with as few lines as you can leave some of that white that breaks out. That can be your winter clouds. I usually work from the outline to the edge of the paper. It's a little easier to control that way. Again, from the outline to the end. And I'm mixing my tones here and catching those outlines. So this is a, kind of a dismal gray day. Then, with our lightest ink, we have I'm going to dry this a bit more, just a bit of sort of like shadow here, whether it's snow embankment or something else. Put a little more water in here, but again along this outline, just to add a little more depth and shadow. Some behind these trees here, some behind the houses, a little bit of shadow up here, could be a edge of a hill or a snow line a little bit back here. And just writing again those outlines. Add some here to those houses so they'll pop a little bit more. Then the last thing I'm going to do is add some dots. I'm drying my brush off, reloading it in black. And I'll first start with the trees and near the trees, some just as lines on the ground, but I can also use this to further refine the smallest branches. But I'm thinking of these as dots, so it has some strong energy to it. And if you wanted, you could use your small detail brush to do these, if that makes it a little bit more suitable to control. But I'm wanting this to overlap a little bit, get a sense of depth, of sort of a thicket of trees. And we have a couple here that are coming from off the page. And then just a few more dots to punctuate. A couple on these mountaintops. And then the last piece I'm going to add are what appear to be birds, and whether they're on the branches or in flight. And as they go farther away, they get even smaller and into the distance. And there's our snow. And if you wanted to put a date on here, I might put it just down at the base of the piece and simply put the year, 2020 is our year. And this is 12th month, so I start with a 10, and then 2 for December, and character for month. And we have a complete piece of winter snow. So let's give that a try. There's also a third model with some snow trees and some red cardinals. So let's go play in the snow.
Here is one more model to paint in the snow. It's a snow pine. You would start by building the trunk and the branches, black on one side, gray on the other side, and then look like little pom-pom balls. Thinking of doing groups of needles, but you're only just doing the very points of them, round in a circle with the middle being open and white, and collecting those in groups as you would pine needles. Then your washes in various grays around the pine needles and some background. And then last, just a couple of red dashes or dots to make a couple of winter cardinals playing in the snow. So if you want to do a little extra, get that extra credit, here's one more piece to try. Have fun. Before you go, one last note. The handouts for the Dance of the Eye and the Hand for beginning students and continuing students, all lessons, are posted as downloadable PDFs at www.laughingwatersstudio.com. Have a good day. You have been watching Distance Learning from Laughing Waters Studio.